Gerard Croiset. Gerard Croiset, March the 10th, 1909 to July the 20th, 1980, was a gifted Dutch psychic and healer. But this classification is not really adequate to describe Croiset's skills. His mentor, Professor W.H.C. Tenhaeff, director of the Parapsychology Institute at the University of Utrecht, called him a paragnost, a word meaning beyond knowledge. In other words, there really was no word capable of describing all he could do. The best source for information about his life comes not from Croiset himself, who largely avoided self-publicity, but from the work of Tenhaeff, who undertook detailed, thorough, and carefully recorded observational work on Dutch mediums in general, via the Parapsychology Institute. Croiset assisted the police, not only in the Netherlands, but in a half-dozen other countries in solving baffling crimes. He helped hundreds of grateful parents by locating missing children, the work which brought him the greatest satisfaction. He helped public officials to find lost documents and assisted scholars in identifying historical manuscripts and artifacts. Sometimes he didn't quite get it right. At this point, every cynic jumps up and down and shouts, "See, he's a fraud." But he was never a fraud. He was a human being who was fallible, doing something that very, very few people are able to do, often in circumstances where all else had failed. Gerard Croiset. My work has to help society. I have a gift from God which I don't understand. I can't use it just to make money from it for myself. If I do, I may lose it. I can't force it. I have to feel it is useful before I can help anybody. About Gerard Croiset. Croiset, during the time he was most active, was married to a supportive lass called Gerda, had 5 much-loved children, and lived in an old, comfortable, dishevelled house at 21 Willem de Zwiegerstraat, near the Parapsychology Institute. In other words, he later had a wonderfully happy family life, but his early beginnings were anything but happy. Croiset was born on March the 10th, 1909 in the small picturesque artist town of Laren in the province of North Holland. Gerard's Jewish parents were both in the theatre. His father was an attractive man with a roving eye and a cavalier attitude towards family life. Papa Croiset would periodically desert Gerard's mother, with whom he had a common-law marriage, and later returned to live with her. As a child, Gerard had little or no home life. When he was 8 years old, he was placed in a foster home, where he was extremely unhappy. He lived with 6 different sets of foster parents. Because he moved from one foster home to another, he received only a skimpy elementary school education. And because none of them understood him, he was constantly in conflict and forever being punished. One cruel foster father disciplined Gerard by chaining his leg to a stake in the floor. Gerard ended up a sickly, undernourished child who suffered from rickets. Because of his frequent illnesses, he was alone a great deal, and fell to turning inwards as a means of escape. And it is thus through cruelty, loneliness and fear that Gerard taught himself how to be psychic. But Gerard's memories of his days in an orphanage are probably the unhappiest of his life. Because he balked at orphanage regulations, he was in repeated conflict with the superintendent, who brutally whipped him with a cane. The boy was also locked up in a small room. When Gerard was 11, he was able to live with his mother again. Because her actor partner had deserted her for good, she now legally married another man. But Gerard could not get along with his stepfather and ran away from home. At age 13, he went to live with a farmer. But whatever he tackled, junior clerk in the office of a harbour master, shop assistant, sales representative for a tea and coffee company, he failed. In 1934, when 25, Croiset married Gerard Tenhaeff, who had been his fiancée for 4 years. A year later, their eldest son, Jimena, was born. Unable to support his wife and child, his in-laws encouraged Croiset to open his own grocery store. They even loaned him the money to get started. But he was a poor businessman and soon went bankrupt. In 1935, he had a nervous breakdown. Croiset's father died at 48 of a heart attack when Gerard was 15. In 1937, when he was 26, his mother died of cancer. And then came the war. After the Nazis occupied Holland in May 1940, Croiset was compelled to wear a Jewish star armband. On a Sunday morning at 5 a.m, the Gestapo arrived at Croiset's home and arrested him. But in 1943, Croiset was freed from the German camp because he was married to a non-Jew. On October 17, 1943, the Nazis again arrested Croiset in an enschede dragnet, this time not as a half-Jew, but along with thousands of other men being shipped to Germany to work in factories. Several months later, he was again released without explanation and was allowed to return to Enschede. His camp experiences deeply affected Gerard Croiset. He never came to terms with the inhumanity of man to man that he witnessed in the war. But the one event that changed Gerard Croiset's life occurred after the war, on a December 1945 evening. Purely out of curiosity, he attended a lecture on parapsychology which Professor Tenhaeff gave. Croiset immediately realized that this was what he had been waiting for. Until then, he felt aimless and purposeless. But after listening to the lecture, he suddenly realized that his extrasensory powers gave his life a new meaning and direction. Professor Tenhaeff. After the lecture, he came up and told me about his paranormal abilities and volunteered his services to me. In early 1946, I made many psychoscopic tests with him. I realized fairly soon that he was very gifted. The more I tested him, the more I became persuaded that Croiset was a remarkable subject for parapsychological research. And after that, Croiset never looked back, working extraordinarily hard in the service of his fellow man, with Professor Tenhaeff to help and guide him, and frankly look after him, as the father he never really had might have done. Croiset died in Utrecht in 1980, aged 71. The key to his ability. Croiset used a bridge to the person being investigated. Professor Tenhaeff called this an inductor, but bridges and inductors are the same thing. He used photographs, rings, gloves, letters, pieces of clothing, bones, even on some strange occasions, bricks and stones. The Dutch paragnost often instantly knows a person he has never met by simply holding something belonging to them. The impression given is that the bridge gives him access to the Akashic records, the perceptions of the person being investigated, and through those perceptions he can see what happened. Murders and finding bodies. Using a bridge, Croiset was able to discover the events leading up to murders and pinpoint the position of the body. Jack Harrison Pollock. Croiset the clairvoyant. I was with Professor Tenhaeff and the scientist's chief assistants since 1954, Miss Nicolauda or Nikki G. Louverens. I cannot reveal the facts about this rape murder of a young girl because the case is still pending. Croiset opened the large package which had been sent by the victim's father with the cooperation of the local police department. He felt the girl's clothing, which showed dried blood, received an immediate impression, sighed, pointed to a spot on the map which was included in the package, and dictated into the tape recorder. This girl was beaten and murdered here, where I marked an X. He then described her murder in detail and gave some clues about the murderer, which helped the police apprehend him. Healing. Croiset could diagnose illnesses, but in certain circumstances could heal them. Where he felt they needed a doctor, however, he said so. Jack Harrison Pollock. Croiset the clairvoyant. Because he accepts no money for his clairvoyance work, Croiset earns his living from his healing. Though it is illegal for healers to charge fees in Holland, they can accept contributions. Croiset's solvent patients usually contributed 5 guilders, $1.40 for the first visit, and 2.5 guilders, 70 cents thereafter. Many poor patients contributed nothing, but Croiset treated all alike. Some patients, in lieu of guilders, brought him cheese, eggs, ham or wine. I can't help everybody, admits Croiset. All I can often do is try to reduce pain. But when people come for the first time, I know right away if I can help them or not. I use my extrasensory perception in my healing. If I get an impression I can help, I tell the patient to come back once a week for 6 weeks. If there is an improvement, I go on. Otherwise, I send them back to their doctors. Among others, Croiset has helped a factory worker paralysed in a factory accident and considered incurable by doctors, who now works as a garage mechanic. Finding a child alive. Croiset was often asked to help find missing children, where no one knew whether the child was dead or alive. Jack Harrison Pollock continues. Nothing on earth pleases Gerard Croiset more than what happened in the tiny town of Gestapo, Holland, on July the 23rd, 1962. An 18-month-old infant named Marika Alfering disappeared. Hundreds of policemen, firemen, and neighbours searched for the missing little girl. They dragged in all the ditches, canals, and nearby cornfields and waters without finding a trace. It grew dark, and the child had still not been found. The burgomaster, A.J. Groteboom of Geralta, then telephoned Croiset. Before he had uttered a single word, Croiset told him what the call was about. The child is alive. It is sleeping near a ditch. The anxious searchers resumed their hunt, this time near the ditches, but the baby was still not found. It was now so dark that the searchers could not see where they were going. They spread out at different spots in the area indicated by Croiset. They remained there, listened for any sounds that might reveal where the child was. Hours passed. At last, one of the men heard a baby's whimpering. He rushed to see what it was, and there found Marika, lying in the mud of the ditch. She probably fell while playing, and being so tiny, couldn't pull herself out of the mire. The sleepy child was taken home, bathed and put to bed. The next morning, she was playing again, as if nothing had happened. Smugglers. One unusual case required Croiset to find out more details of some smugglers. Jack Harrison Pollock continues. On November the 10th, 1952, Mr. A.M. den Hollander, Chief of the Netherlands Customs Investigation Department in Enschede, had a session with Croiset. Mr. den Hollander showed the sensitive a photograph of a man whom he suspected of fraudulent dealings in coffee and asked, "Can you tell me anything about him?" Croiset did not know the man, nor did the customs official volunteer any information. After gazing at and touching the photograph, Croiset quickly stated, "This man is a smuggler. He has 2 collaborators in Enschede." Correct. The custom official knew this during the consultation. He also works with a man living in Amsterdam and one in Drenthe. Correct. The customs official also knew this. He does business with someone who lives in Antwerp. Correct. The custom official didn't know this, but intercepted correspondence later revealed it to be true. Mr. den Hollander showed some scarves to Croiset. "These scarves come from Duisburg," the clairvoyant promptly asserted. Though not then known to the customs inspector, investigation confirmed that the scarves had come from Duisburg, Germany. The customs official then showed a picture of the suspected Amsterdam smuggler to Croiset. "This is the man I mentioned from Amsterdam," exclaimed the sensitive. "He has a stomach disorder and belches a lot." Though this man did, indeed, belch frequently, Dr. Tenhaeff could not discover whether he had a stomach disorder. Goods have also arrived from Brabant. They have not been transported by car, but by train, though this wasn't known by the customs official during the consultation. Afterwards he learned that the suspect had sent a huge quantity of coats from Germany by train to Enschede. The coffee has not disappeared across the smugglers' trails, but normally through the customs barriers. This fact was also unknown during the consultation. Mr. den Hollander later discovered that part of the coffee passed the border through the usual barriers, hidden in a limousine. The coffee is only a small part of all the things the man has smuggled. The coffee has not been taken far into Germany, but has remained between Grunau and Münster. I see the bagnio, a public bath, in Bergsteinfurt. Correct. Later inquiry proved that part of the smuggled coffee was handed to a waiting German in the bagnio at Bergsteinfurt. Part of the contraband was carried in a truck across the border by a forwarding agent. Though the customs department found neither the truck nor the driver, it learned later that a forwarding agent had legally exported goods for the Combine. I have the impression that the man from Amsterdam has a secret hiding place. It is behind a picture hanging over a sideboard. We could not find that hiding place, reports the Enschede customs official, but it is our firm conviction that the man from Amsterdam has been of greater importance in this case than we could prove so far. 5 months later, on April 11th, 1953, Mr. Den Hollander gratefully wrote to Professor Tenhaeff, thanking him for the invaluable help of Gerard Croiset in cracking this case, in disclosing exactly how the smuggling ring operated, and for furnishing key information that the Customs Department didn't have. Summary. There is much that Croiset did that we have been unable to cover in this short video, and his case history is well worth exploring. For example, Croiset used his clairvoyant abilities to aid the resistance, predicting which houses would be raided by the Gestapo. In his 1964 biography, Croiset the Clairvoyant, journalist Jack Harrison Pollock divides Croiset's cases broadly into these categories: murders, sex crimes, thefts, missing children, missing adults, missing animals, lost objects, psychic archaeology, and paleoanthropology. Gerda Termorsch died in January 1973. A few years later, Croiset remarried to Adele Jonkman. He died in Utrecht in 1980 of a heart attack, aged 71.